V. Wade was overturned. A major corporation had the same story. It was, don't worry, Mr. or Mrs. Employee. We're going to help you get rid of your child if you want to. And I thought, this is the most sickening thing that these companies, out of greed, because it's cheaper for them to pay for a travel abortion than it is for maternity leave. Yeah. What if we did the exact opposite? What if we made it easy for our employees to have children? We're going to pay for the medical costs for maternity and paternity leave. Third thing we decided to do was, if an employee wanted to grow their family through adoption, we'll pay for the medical costs. It ended up going viral for major media outlets between Daystar and CBN and Fox News, the Daily Wire, a million other places.
Welcome to the Faith Hustle podcast, where we help young Christian entrepreneurs learn how to build their business and careers God's way. My name is Maquenda. I'm your host. I've been an entrepreneur for almost 10 years, and in that time, I've had the honor and joy to be mentored and guided by some of the most successful entrepreneurs that were not just devoted in their careers and in their practice and in their fields, but they were devoted to the Lord, to their faith. They're devoted to their families, and they had a holistic view of success. And that's what we strive for here at Faith Hustle. We teach on 5 pillars here at Faith Hustle. We teach on being spirit-led, on having heart of stewardship, on integrity, on humility and generosity. Those are the things that we believe make up someone that has a faith hustle, not just someone that works and is on their grind, but someone that does their work unto the Lord. And if that describes you, if that's something that you're wanting to pursue as well, you're like, yeah, I want to go on that journey, that's something I want to develop in myself, then we encourage you to join this tribe of people who are like-minded doing the same thing. Subscribe wherever you're listening to, whether it be Apple or Spotify, maybe on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. We would love if you could leave us a like and a comment telling us where you're watching from. If you have any questions, we'd love to help and guide you on your faith hustle. And if you've been listening for any amount of time and you've been encouraged, challenged, equipped by the episodes, we would love if you could leave us a review. It really, really does help to get the word out to more people so more people can be inspired and challenged to grow. And on today's episode, I have a very good friend, someone that I actually met years ago. We'll kind of get into that. But he's a great man of God, business owner, in politics, in so many different realms, veteran, and someone that I think you're going to really learn from and really be inspired and encouraged by his story and his journey. I've been really excited for this, and it's been working in the months, and so I'm really glad that I get to sit down with Sean Turner.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, this has been in the works for a minute, man. And first of all, shout out to Elite Real Estate for letting us use their office yet again. Everyone thought that this was like our typical spot. It's like, no, Steve is just really nice. And
this is a phenomenal space.
No, it really is. But man, thank you for coming on.
Absolutely.
Man. Absolutely, man. I'm excited to jump into just your story and as I mentioned, kind of your we met at a few, I think this was it 2019 or 20?
It was before COVID.
It was before COVID. Okay, so I think it was 2019, May 2019. Before I moved to Dallas, I came down. Gateway had a John Maxwell event.
Conference,
and that's where we met. I think we met at the breakfast that we had.
I think we were like the 2 youngest people there.
Literally. Yeah, and I stood up to ask a question. I was by far the youngest person, but I love environments like that. I like being the youngest guy there.
Yeah, something that stood out about you to me was your joy. I mean, you got there to ask a question, like no fear. Everyone turns to the back of the room, sees this guy from Michigan just asking questions, and everyone's like, "That's a great question."
Yeah, no, and then John gave me a hard time for my name, but he ended up, he signed a book for me, and so that was honestly a transformative time. I've already talked about it on the show, but just his humility, I learned more from just observing, just that event. It was really cool. But yeah, we met, and then like a few years later, like realized, oh man, like I don't think you even realized I was here in Texas.
No, I didn't. Yeah, you text me, hey, I'm in DFW. I'm like, oh shoot, when?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, moved down here, and then we have a ton of mutual friends. Obviously, Steve being one of them,
Yeah.
and a few others. You attend Mercy Culture,
Yep.
and you know, got to see you and your, which we'll talk a little bit, in your political run for mayor of the city that I live in.
Yeah.
And yeah, and just, you know, so many incredible things, and I've just admired you from afar for a while, just how you communicate, how you lead, you wear your heart on your sleeve. You know, there's a few people that I can say do that, and so I'm excited to kind of allow people to get really inspired by the way you lead and the way that you do business, because I do think it's different. And so,
Well, I have to say, before we get into that story, I noticed, I guess this is for the first time when I started listening to your podcast, Faith Hustle has like one H.
yeah,
And they say that the devil's in the details, but
Yeah.
I think you're redeeming that because it's like showing that they both have something in common and they both are connected.
yeah.
And so,
Hey,
that was
listen,
so cool.
I'm trying to tell the story of all the time. Like, hey, I didn't make a mistake. It was like a misspelled. Like, people are like, it's two H's, right? It's like, no, it's one. It's one.
That domain wasn't on the discount or something
No.
like that.
No, I think I actually did have a domain with two H's, but I was like, no,
Yeah.
I like one H. I like the story that it tells. It's like, no, you can't separate it. It's together. Faith and hustle. Or, yeah. So yeah, hey, we're trying out here. We're trying. But hey, let's jump right in. Okay, so I love to hear a little bit of your story. Again, when I look at the landscape of the things that you're in and what you've done, it's like you've lived many lives. And how old are you?
I'm 36 now.
36. Like at 36 years old, like you've done a lot. Like you served in our armed forces. You know, business owner, politics, you know, a bunch of, obviously I'll let you kind of tell your story, but I'm like, man, this is like, there's a direction I want to go with this episode of kind of being honestly led by the Lord, in your journey. But I'd love to hear your story a bit, just, you know, kind of your beginnings and what's led you kind of what you're doing now and business and politics and all that stuff.
It's one of those things when you start praying, God, will you give me wisdom above and beyond my years? What comes with that is you start looking older too, because you've lived this like action-packed life.
Yeah.
But I think one of the themes, like you can look at my life of what I've lived, and one of the themes that sticks out is that I think I hear God. I then go to test what I think I heard.
Yeah.
And then I come to find out, oh, this really is God with certainty.
Mm-hmm.
And then I take action or take risk to go do what He said to do. And I think there's this inability for a lot of people to take risks. And I think the first reason why people tend to take less risk than they could is that they lean on their own understanding. And so I think it's Proverbs 3 that says, trust God with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding.
All your ways.
Acknowledge Him in all your ways, and He will direct your paths.
Yeah.
And I think the second part of why people may not take risk is that they have limiting beliefs or mental constraints that they have grown up with. And these are ingrained deep into who we are from our parents to who you are, what you're capable of, how the world works. And I think if we're able to remove those and change our thinking, we're able then to take risks. And I think it's Romans 12 says, do not copy or do not conform to the behaviors of this world,
Right.
but let God transform you by the way you change your thinking.
Renew of your mind.
And then you will learn what His will is for you, which is good, perfect, and pleasing. And so I think when we start changing the way we think, it changes our behavior. And so that's kind of the theme throughout my life, is all these times where it felt risky to do X, Y, Z, but then I do it, and it's just like, wow, that was God. The results are amazing, you know?
Wow, that's so good. So tell me about kind of your start. So were you 21 when you entered into the armed forces? Or
I think I was 19, and then when I was actually on my first deployment in Iraq, I turned 21.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
And I'll never forget, because I had never had a beer, and that like Anheuser-Busch had donated pallets of beer to soldiers for the Super Bowl. And so they were passing like 2 beers a piece. It was like might as well try it. And so I spent 13 months in the Army.
Wow.
And my whole goal was to enlist, and then I really wanted that signing bonus. At the time, it was like 20,000.
Wow.
After taxes and stuff, it's a lot less.
Yeah.
But then ended up just a few weeks out of basic training, ended up deploying to Iraq and spent 13 months there.
Wow.
Came back and then was on track to finish college and pursue different things. But military shaped me in many ways. And it's one of those things that it's bittersweet. Every time I watch a movie like Zero Dark 30, where they're going after Bin Laden, the special forces, or doing these cool missions, I like look to my wife. I'm like, I want to go back in. She's like, no.
No. You actually can't.
You have too many responsibilities now.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So.
Oh my goodness! Wow. And so that was kind of what led you to go into the military?
I jokingly say I played too much Call of Duty as a kid growing up, but no,
too much Halo.
Yeah. I just have this sense of protection, and so I was a lifeguard when I was like 16, and then which is like protecting people from drowning. And then I joined the military, which I love our country. I love what we stand for, the values of our founding fathers, what they stood for, and continuing that and fighting to protect that. And then here I am in insurance now, which is also protecting people from a different perspective.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting theme of protection over Sean Turner's life.
Yeah. Actually, now that you said it, I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Actually, it really does.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had a sense of that's kind of on you as far as to protect. You went in. So when you got out, what was kind of your next step? What was your next move?
Yeah, the transition out of the military was very hard because it's one of those things where your world is your oyster, and it's like, what do you want to do? Like you can. I had the GI Bill, which was basically a grant program to go to college. So I ended up finishing college, but during that same season, I actually went to flight school to get my pilot's license for helicopters.
You really have done everything.
Yeah. So I was on the tail end of running out of money for that because flight school, and this is now more than 12 years ago. It was expensive.
I'm sure it's more expensive now, probably.
Much more expensive. And I saw a video of, I think it was Willie Nelson, up in a helicopter shooting hogs. And I thought, I want to fly that helicopter.
And just hang with Willie Nelson.
Yeah. And so it was just all these cool things I've done in my life with flight school and military. But then it was like, how do I transition to a professional career? And I knew I always wanted to start a business, but the timing wasn't right. It's always what's the right timing. So I ended up going to work for my father-in-law, and he owned a company. I was like, well, this is like the second best thing. Instead of owning your company, you're kind of brought into one that's existing, and you get to learn all the things. And so I was there for about 4.5 years, and he taught me so many things. He was a pioneer of sorts, and so he was doing the whole work from home thing back in like 2006.
Oh, wow. Yeah, he really was a pioneer.
Yeah, and so he had these ideas that he would pursue, and some of them were wildly successful, and others they weren't. And so after I got married, I found out. So it's like working for the mafia. When you marry your wife, and then you start working for her dad, and then you find out her sister also works for the dad, and then the soon-to-be brother-in-law works for the dad.
Oh wow!
So, it was great, but my wife ended up getting this entanglement with security because she saw him just make millions of dollars to losing millions of dollars to making millions of dollars to losing, and so it was like this roller coaster that she was on. And so when God finally spoke to me to start my own business, I was like, God, is this you? And this is that time where it's like, God, I think I hear you, but I need to confirm this.
Right.
And so my test when I was getting to the point of starting my own company was, all right, I know this is God if I take this idea to Lauren and she agrees with it. I was like, there's no way, because she's already told me there's no way you're ever starting your own business.
Yeah.
And I didn't exactly know why. Now it's more clear as to why. But I went to her, I was like, Lauren, and we were poor. We were broke. Like I was working a job. We didn't have any money. In fact, we couldn't even afford vacation. So my uncle gave me a week at his timeshare in the mountains. And so we got away, and that's when God spoke to me. And it's have you ever seen the movie Frozen?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Parts of it. Yeah.
There's this song in Frozen. It's like the lyrics say, "It's funny how some distance makes everything seem small." And so sometimes we need to get out of our day to day and then get some distance, and then God can speak in that time that we make space for Him.
That's a word, and that's every vacation I've been on, I always leave time to like get instruction because for whatever reason, like you said, you're just your mind's in a different space, and you're able to see things. That, and when I'm on an airplane, I don't know what it is. I always hear from the Lord so clear.
It's because you don't have cell signal. You're not,
yeah,
exactly.
You're not distracted. You can't go on Instagram. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you go. The Lord speaks to you, and you get this word or direction to
start my own company.
Start your own company.
And I was like, Lauren, this is the details. I think I'm going to start my own company. What do you think? And I thought for sure she's going to say no. There's no way. And she's like, yeah, I think this is from God. And I never mentioned guys. I was like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What are your thoughts on that? She's like, yes, I think this is from God. I'm like, oh, this is God.
No, this is from the Lord. If you're saying yes, yeah.
And so we ended up starting an insurance agency, and out of our house, we just moved into a bigger house, and it was one of those things where we had all the excuses to not start a business. Financially, we're not at a place, and then like time-wise, we also had 2 young kids at the time, and so I was like, "What's the worst that could happen?" The worst that could happen is this fails,
right?
And then I go get a job, and then we might have some debt from that time period where it failed, but like we're young, we can get over this,
right?
And so we started the agency out of the house, and I was making cold calls from my home office, and in the midst of me making phone calls, we would have babies screaming in the other room because we had we had a baby and a toddler.
Wow!
And I remember at one point a prospect would be like, is that a baby crying? And this is 2018. And I was like, oh yeah, that's the daycare next door. I was too embarrassed to say I'm working from home.
Hey, listen, you gotta fake it till you make it sometimes. You gotta do what you gotta do. Yeah.
Oh, and I read this book, Art of War. And in the book it said, and this is the thing, I think there's a lot of business books that they're obviously not written by Christian authors.
Right.
And when I recommend those to people, I usually say, you want to chew the meat, but spit out the bones.
Right.
And so there's good stuff in there, but some of it's garbage.
Right, exactly.
And Art of War, it talks about when you're small, act big, and when you're big, act small. And I thought, you know what? This is the thing I need to do for people to trust me at this point in time. I need to make it look like it's more than just me. And so I remember I set up our phone system that had an IVR system, and that's the type of system where you press 1 for this department, press 2 for this. And so we set them all up, but I had all of the departments, 1, 2, or 3, 4, or 5, or 6, all come to me. Like it was just one person. And so
That's amazing.
There was things, but I didn't know what I was doing in the sense of I was setting up processes for our future without even knowing I was setting up processes.
Wow.
And so it was a fun, exciting time, but literally 6 weeks into starting the business, making cold calls, we were getting some traction. My wife comes in and hands me a thermometer, and I'm on the phone. I'm like looking down at the thermometer, and I realize it's not a thermometer; it's a pregnancy test. And she's literally sitting on the floor crying. And now I'm thinking in my head like, all right, prospect, I'll call you back later.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And I'm like, is she crying because she's pregnant or crying because she's not pregnant? Because I don't know how to read this thing.
Right, yeah.
And come to find out, she was pregnant with our third child. I was like,
goodness.
You know what? I've got to make this work.
Right, yeah.
I'm backed in a corner. I've got to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing will motivate you like desperation. Like, no, this has to work. Yeah, there is no option. Yeah.
And I kept clinging on to this word. I felt like God told me to do this. And so he provided for us. That first year, we made just enough to pay our mortgage. Now, we got into some debt because obviously we had to buy groceries and pay for insurance, pay for cell phone bills, all those things. And so it's one of those things we kept going, and he came through. Wow. And it was neat because we ended up hiring our first employee in 2019, right around the same time I met you. And then 2020, everything shuts down. I'm like, no, you know what I know is anytime there's a business, an opportunity for the economy to have a downturn in the market, You can either contract with it or you can expand.
Yes.
And so we had faith that we were going to expand. And so we ended up hiring a couple people during that period of time when everyone else was shrinking back. And then fast forward to 2022, when Roe v. Wade had overturned. Have you heard this story?
I've heard bits of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
Roe v. Wade was overturned, and we were all celebrating like this Dobbs decision that stopped abortion from being the federally mandated thing to now allowing states to
Right.
choose that.
Yeah.
We thought we need to celebrate this.
Right.
But every time I turn on TV, I see Lockheed Martin and Tesla and Walmart and every other major corporation had the same story. And the media was just hammering this same story over and over into people's heads. And it was, don't worry, Mr. or Mrs. Employee, we're going to help you get rid of your child if you want to. We're going to pay for you to fly to California, fly to Colorado. And I thought, this is the most sickening thing that these companies, out of greed, because it's cheaper for them to pay for a travel abortion than it is for maternity leave.
Yeah.
And even the fact that if they go on maternity leave, what if they don't come back?
Right.
And so
it's more of a risk for them.
Exactly. These corporations are trying to make the easy button be, let me just get rid of this baby.
Wow.
Because you know what? I need to keep working.
And so, the name of love and where,
in the name of women's healthcare, women's choice.
Right.
And so I just told my wife, I'm like, you know what if we did the exact opposite? What if we made it easy for our employees to have children? Because when we had our 3 children, I was broke, number one. And then I was back to work within like 24 hours of having the baby. And so we just said, we're going to pay for our employees. We're going to pay for the medical costs associated with the birth of our children, our employees' children, and then offer maternity and paternity leave, which in the grand scheme of large corporations, that's easy to do. But for small businesses,
that's hard.
Yeah. When you have someone who's gone for 6 to 12 weeks or longer, it's financially straining, but then also it means that more work is held on everyone else's shoulders. And so then the third thing we decided to do was, if an employee wanted to grow their family through adoption, we'll pay for the medical costs there as well.
Oh, my Lord.
And so because a lot of our clients are employers, because a large part of what we do is employer medical benefits, we decided let's try to activate other employers to do the same thing. So we created this little post, created a little guide. We called the Pro-Life Strategy Guide. And we were just educating people on, hey, if you decide to do this as an option, here's some employee policies you can put in your handbook. And then also here is how we did it to get the most tax advantage way.
Yeah.
And it ended up going viral. And normally we get, McQuinda, you would be so sad, we get like 17 likes on a good day on
Hey,
our
listen,
Facebook.
It'd be like that. It'd be like that. I ain't hating. It's hard in these streets.
Yeah. So social media just was never a focus for us.
Yeah.
And this is the one time that all of a sudden a friend emailed me and said, hey, Sean, look at this link. And it was a guy named Ben Shapiro, who has a media outlet called The Daily Wire. And they wrote an article about us. And I was like, what the heck? Is this fake?
Dang,
Sometimes,
that's wild.
have you seen the Nicolas Cage thing that you put on people's websites where every image that they go to on a web browser is like Nicolas Cage?
Yeah.
I thought it was something like that, where it's like, this is like a spoof site.
Yeah.
And long story short, we ended up having like 75 different major media outlets between Daystar and CBN and Fox News and Breitbart and Newsmax and a million other places reach out to do interviews. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not that guy. I don't want to be in front of a camera.
Right.
That's why I named our company Buffer Insurance and not Sean
Turner
Insurance Agency.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to build it around me. And I felt like I don't want this attention.
Yeah.
And I knew God said, you can steward this, and steward it might be to put the coin in the ground and bury it, or not take the interview request, or to take this and amplify the message. Because he reminded me, the message is not about how great we are.
Right.
It's, hey, this is something you can do to your business and for your employees as well.
Right.
And so we said yes. And it just, I think that one post on Facebook got 1 million engagements, or I guess more than that. So the risk we took, and this is going back to us saying yes to this, we barely had $5,000 in our business bank account at the time
Wow.
when we agreed to doing this, because I was like, we basically took we were in growth mode where we're taking cash and just pouring it
You're
back
pouring it
into
back,
business.
yeah.
And so we didn't keep very much on hand. And so I thought, you know what? This is a big risk, but because like all of our employees are in their 20s and 30s and they're all growing their families. And I was like, but it takes 9 months to have a baby.
Yeah.
And so we can start saving up now.
It's like, so if y'all want to start planning, in about 9 months, we'll have it.
yeah, exactly. And so we decided we're going to do this. And unbeknownst to us and unbeknownst to one of our employees, his wife was already pregnant. And so like 2 weeks after we announced, hey, this is what we're doing,
Yeah.
One of our employees came to me and said, hey, I'm pregnant. And I know I wasn't excited about this thing that you decided to do before.
Yeah.
But now tell me more details about it.
Wow.
And
That is amazing.
Yeah.
How many employees did y'all have at the time?
We had 5.
Gotcha.
And now we have 12. And so just
Wow.
even since then, in the last year and a half or so, we've like more than doubled our company.
My goodness. That is I remember you telling me that story. Obviously not in as much detail, but I think there is, it kind of reminds me of what you were saying. Like you felt like your calling was to protect people and to help, and not just your clients, but your employees, and how God used that and used it to be a light that and inspired others, maybe other companies to do the same. I do remember that time. It was very, there's a lot of interesting conversations happening around that. I felt like a lot of the church was afraid to even celebrate. It was an interesting thing, right? And I think, I think there's always times where, in hardship, I think we all want to achieve greatness, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're listening to this, I think that's obviously like is a cornerstone to who you are. If you're listening to this, you want to become better because you believe that there's something on the inside of you that you want, that there's more for you to do, right? But typically, it's greatness is built and shown on display during times of pressure.
Yeah.
Right. It's not in like the seasons where it's great, right? It's like we don't know of the, like David and Goliath. It's like we would never hear of David if there wasn't a Goliath for him to conquer,
Exactly.
right? We wouldn't hear of, maybe a Daniel if there wasn't a den of lions that he had to conquer. Like there's always something where that greatness that we aspire to, it comes out of pressure. And I think that's phenomenal that literally in faith of like, we got $5,000 as an account, but we're going to honestly, that encourages me because I'm like, okay, here I'm thinking y'all were just rolling the bank like, oh, we got it. It's just, it's in the back supply. Like we taking care, but it's like, no, it's a faith step. And what did that do? I love to actually, this is a little bit of a pivot, but what did that do to the culture in your own company?
Yeah, so part of that was that we had been very intentional on building culture in our company, and so much so that we decided to articulate core values. And I know some companies like Enron do that, and Enron's a classic example because they had this major scandal where they were pumping up their numbers, and investors thought these people are just gold mine.
Yeah,
and the curtains opened up and revealed that this is all made up and it just comes crumbling down. Well, one of Enron's core values was integrity. And obviously it didn't mean anything to him.
I have to pause you right there. I always laugh at, not always, but I think it could become like, oh, it's the thing to do, or we should have company values because we're a company, but it's not really stuff that you actually will live out. It's just something that like a marketing firm put together of like, yeah, you probably should have this on your website, but it's not like what you actually live by.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things that really led us to that decision was our core values. So we have 5, and what was helped us to not just have the core value, but we integrate it in to our weekly meetings to where we'll nominate an employee for exhibiting one of the core values. We'll go through the core values, what we call impact statements. So for example, excellence is one of our core values. Then we have 3 statements underneath that define what is excellence to us. Because you can have, let's say, teamwork, And teamwork can mean something totally different from one
100%.
employee to another. So we have statements that are that define what success looks like in that area. And so we'll then have the employees go around and nominate each other each week for that. And so they're
they do it themselves. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's not just always coming from me. It's maybe Camille got it this week, and she actually this past week, Camille's my assistant. She got it nominated from someone else, and now she passed the baton to Carmen, who's another employee.
I love that.
And what's nice about that is celebrating the values you want replicated in your company, but you're also helping employees to feel and be seen and acknowledged for doing stuff that maybe they think no one else sees this.
Right.
And so we go through and we say, hey, this is what excellence is. And then this is how I saw Carmen exhibit that in this past week.
Yeah.
And so those core values led to us making that decision. And one of the things we always say at Buffer Insurance is we believe your future is worth protecting. And when you think about it, it's like, well, the future of these unborn babies is worth protecting.
Right.
So how can we help protect them? Let's make it easy for our employees to grow their families.
Wow. That is so good. I think there's so many gems for any business owner that has a team, has employees. Again, I think it can be very popular to just put values on a wall, but if it's not reinforced, you're never going to see it, right? I love even just the simplest thing of like having a challenge of your people nominating, who exhibits those values, and then also, like you said, defining it. I remember I heard a pastor years ago when I was younger. He used to say, "The power to define is the power to fulfill. If you can't define it, you can't fulfill it." Yeah. And I do think there's a lot of times we mean well. We want to do. I mean, even like you said, with integrity or protection, those could be nice sayings. But if you don't clearly define what that means for you, it's going to be tough for yourself or anybody else that's following behind you to exhibit that.
You have to be intentional, whether your team is 2 or 10 or
Right.
100 or 1,000. You have to define the culture you want in your business because that defines everything else and how to act. Because if you're not defining it, other people will.
Yes.
And so one entity that has great, I would say, culture in the sense that they've defined their values is the military. Yeah. So in the Army, they have defined values, and it's in the form of an acronym of leadership. So it's loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. And so it's like, it's kind of neat that it just happens to spell
that it works.
LDR, but ours doesn't spell it. I've tried to like manipulate it. Ours doesn't spell anything cool.
Yeah. And as long as it's, 5 is not that much, like if it was 15, it'd be like, all right, you're going to have to find a way to spell this out. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I love that. I think something that you said that I really like, and I think a lot of people can be like, oh, like when I get there, I'll do this. Like when we get to X amount of employees or we get to X amount of revenue, then we'll start implementing this. But like typically, when it comes to critical decisions, you are going to go to whatever your default is. And so if it's not already present in the beginnings, then it's going to be really hard to make that shift. Or like, I don't know, do you find that a lot of times with other entrepreneurs are like, oh, when I get here, I'll do that then.
You know? Absolutely. I had a friend who said that one time. He's like, my goal is to make $1 million. And at that point, then and he's like, his motive for wanting to make $1 million, it was a lie to himself that he believed, but it was so that he could give more. And he wasn't. The reality is he wasn't giving anything at the time.
Yeah. And
it's the same thing that we did. Well, hey, we're going to be generous with. We don't have the money yet. We're going to save up for it. We're going to still be generous. And so generosity comes, and that's why Jesus saw the widow who gave 2 mites,
right?
Which is like basically 2 pennies.
She gave more than all of you.
Yeah, and so it comes out of that heart of generosity.
Yes.
And so if you want to be generous, you have to start being generous now with what you have.
Yeah.
Not when you get to a certain point.
That's so good. I think I was funny. I had a conversation with a friend not too long ago, and I was challenging him because we talk about generosity all the time. I'm like, man, I think we are far enough where we can, we don't have to wait, like you said, until we're in our 50s. So like that's when we'll start giving and really being radically generous. It's like I think we got to establish the habit now. so that when we get there, it's the same thing we were doing. It's just more zeros, right? Because Ian Bruckner, we had on our show not too long ago. He talked about how money just it takes on the beholder, right? And so it's just going to make you more of who you already are. So if you're already generous, you're going to be even more generous when that time
and he
comes.
talked about, I listened to that episode, and he was like, don't serve money, have it serve you.
Yeah.
And there's many ways you can do that. And part of that is inviting people into your team. And so that when we were growing our business, I remember it was just me, and I was like, this is the most stressful thing. Like, our income's going up, but so is our responsibility. Our income would go, but so is, and so it just required more and more and more and more of me, which like was terrible for my family because they saw less and less and less of me. And I remember I got to the point where I was dropping balls and I wasn't doing things in excellence. And at the time, I didn't have all these defined core values. And so I knew that was part of who I am, though. And so I remember I was like, I need to hire someone, but I don't think we can afford it. And so it's like making that leap from 1 to 2 is huge.
Yes.
And so we finally did. And my first employee, she's still with us today, 6 years later. And she like took so much off my plate.
Yes.
And I had prided myself as being this phenomenal individual contributor. Instead, I needed to change my thinking to become a leader, and leaders delegate well, leaders cast vision and things like that. And so it's one of those things, it was scary to do that. But when we brought her on, our revenue kept growing because then it offloaded all these like account management type things that I could then go free up more time to go sell.
Yeah. No, it is. When I got my first, my first and only assistant, shout outs to Becca, I was like, why didn't I do this years ago? I literally was like, what was I doing? And I think part of it, honestly, if I would be honest, was fear. It was just like, I can't afford it. Yeah, that'd be great at one point. But it's like, it was almost like when I took that step, then it's like, oh, like you just have to believe God bigger for him to supply not just for you, but for somebody else. And he just does it.
Yeah.
Like, and I've seen him do it. And my prayers changed. My prayers changed from God, provide for me, to I need you to go above and beyond for this business so that the people who look to me, for resources, that they're blessed. Like I actually, my prayers have changed. Like, Lord, I want them to be blessed. So please bless me. Bless these efforts, bless the work of our hands so that their families can be taken care of.
Yeah. Is it in Proverbs that says the blessing of the Lord will make someone rich and add no sorrow to it? And, there's a lot of principles in the Bible that speak towards blessings, speak towards riches, speak towards prosperity. And the reality is some of those are exclusive to Christians. Some of those are exclusive to people who have God's favor and blessing. But then there's a lot of principles that are not exclusive. They're non-discriminatory to people who don't believe the Bible, who've never read it before.
Yeah.
So you look at Jeff Bezos, and I can guarantee you when he got divorced, he had a lot of sorrow when his wife got half of his estate, And so
she became the richest woman, I think, in history just from the divorce. Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that we need to do things that are going to put us in favor with God to command His blessing, and then the riches can come from that. And so there's it's not just a simple formula, but I always am reminded of, as Deuteronomy 8:18 says, God gives us the ability to produce wealth, to confirm His covenant. And so it's like He gives us the ability to have wealth and produce it, but it's not just so that we can have a jet ski and have fun on the lake.
Yeah.
It's so that we can then go confirm His covenant and continue to build His kingdom.
That's such a good word, to confirm His covenant.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a means to the end, right? I love that. I love to hear. So where is Buffer at now as far as, if you don't mind asking, you have 12 employees. How much business are you guys generating? Or, what's that been like? Obviously, you've been doing it the Lord's way, honoring the Lord. Because part of what I really want to use this platform to teach people, it's not a matter, because, like, it's not just, God's way is better.
Mhm.
It is, but God's ways works.
Yeah.
Like it works in the marketplace. Like it's not this thing of like, oh man, if I choose God's way, I'm gonna be broke. You know, it's like
Yeah.
because some people have that fear of like, man, if I do this, I'm just gonna be struggling out. It's like, no, like if you actually use the principles that are in Scripture, like it actually works.
Yeah. No, you're right. So I will say, though, there's times where God tells us something and it's not going to lead to prosperity, but he tells us things to do because they're right and they're just and they're going to build his kingdom in ways that's why it's always a joke. People say, well, you're going to get a crown in heaven for this because you're not going to get one here. And I'm so thankful, though, that God has provided us a business that has been successful and has been something inspirational to others, because that's one thing I love to do is to help inspire others. And I'm glad I'm not like Ezekiel, that literally God spoke to him at one point. I can't remember what chapter it was, but God said to tie yourself with ropes, and then you're going to portion out some seeds and things to eat, and then you're going to cook that over human dung. I was like, I had to reread that. I was like, is this, what is it? I'm so glad God has not told me to do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Even
there could be
Ezekiel,
worse things.
Even Ezekiel was appalled. He said, all right, God, please don't help me defile myself. Make it at least cow dung. But we do things that God says, and it goes back to that time he told me to say yes to this, to starting it. And then yes to this next opportunity, yes to the next. And so it's one of those things that we're not an overnight success. It's been 6 years in the making. But I will say there's things that we do today that garner more success with less effort with each step of the way. And part of that, you go back to in the beginning, you're starting something, it's a grind.
Yeah.
To make $1 into $2 is work.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And so the more you get going, and I think Jim Collins talks about it in one of his books, Good to Great. It's a flywheel, and it's this big, heavy metal wheel that you push to make one rotation. It's a lot of effort, but then the next one, it's got a little bit more momentum, so you push it, and it keeps. And so with each rotation, it's less and less effort. And so I'm not saying it's easy now, because our business is a business of constraints, and so when we, as a business, grow. Like a lot of times companies struggle with lead generation. Well, we took the approach that we were going to build out referral networks. And so we do that through gifts. And because I was looking up scripture left and right, like how do businesses succeed? And I kept seeing highlighted is like a bribe will open up doors.
Oh.
And I was like, a bribe? Like, so I need to like find some dirt on someone and then
exactly. You send them an email. Like, we know this about you.
I know that. Yeah. But in a lot of translations, it was a gift. And so I started looking at it. I was like, how can I create gifts to give to people that will garner favor, that will then open up the door, that will then lead to us becoming clients, that will then lead us up to becoming referral partners, et cetera. And so I do that all the time. And honestly, it's more fun way to do business, because when you give someone a gift, it's unexpected. It's not just like a Christmas gift. It's like spontaneous, right?
Yeah.
And so
that's been your sales tactic of
that's one of them. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
I mean, and I can stand by that. He brought me a gift. I got some Thin Mints over there and coffee. He brought this is his water that he brought, and he's the guest. And I was like, man, you didn't have to bring that. But that's just who you are. But I love that. Honestly, I think some of y'all, especially if you're any client services business, y'all need to steal that. It's funny, my assistant and I, we're working behind the scenes with that of like we're just calling it like, how can we just surprise our clients? How can we, and sow seeds for people that we want to do business with, leave something at their door or something, and
it's like providing value before you get paid.
Yes.
And so if you can provide value to someone with whatever your service is, like that's where you get that favor.
Yeah.
So
what a scripture! Wow, that a bribe will open door.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's a lot of scriptures that say the same thing, scattered all throughout Proverbs and other books of the Bible.
Man,
so
listen, I try to tell people, listen, and I love business books. I love Good to Great. It's like the business Bible, right? But the Bible itself, it's got so many gems in it. We would read it. It's like, listen, like it's got what you need. Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes when we read through scripture, especially in Proverbs, it's one of those things that you can read over like 10 nuggets, but they don't really mean anything to you because you don't have context for it. And so that's why I think books like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill to Rich Dad, Poor Dad and all these things is that they're taking maybe one of those proverbs and then they're adding context to it.
Right.
That is something easier for us to relate to or digest. And so I think when I was a young entrepreneur, I hadn't started Buffer Insurance yet. I had some side hustle things that I was doing, hoping to get some momentum. And I really desired a mentor, and I couldn't find one. Everyone's talking about finding a mentor. There's no one that wants to mentor out there because it takes time, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, the cheapest mentor you can find is a book.
That's
and I was
good.
like, if I want to tap into the mind of Jim Collins of Good to Great or Robert Kiyosaki of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I can buy his book for $12.99.
Yeah, absolutely.
and
get into their brain.
Yeah. And so what's nice about that is you can do it at your own pace. And so I actually hate reading books. But I'll listen to them all day. And so listening is one of those things you can do in the car.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. By the way, Rich Dad Poor Dad was the first business book I ever read.
Wow.
And it made me want to get into business. I was 16 when I read it, and my mind was blown. I was like, oh my goodness, like I don't want to be the poor dad. I want to be and I learned what an asset was, what a liability was. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like. I'm thinking people who are rich out here, they just liability rich, you know, I learned a lot in that. If you haven't read it, you 100% should. Man, I'd love to, in our remaining time that we have, you recently ran for mayor, and which is a hard undertaking by any means. Doing a campaign, I can only imagine, right? It's a lot. And again, I kind of talked about in the beginning of like, you've had multiple lives in these 36 years of military and insurance and now politics. What led you down that path of like, man, I want to run? And what about it, was inspired you to like, no, I want to lead in this way? I'm curious from your perspective of why you wanted to take that leap.
Yeah, so going into that was just earlier this year.
Yes.
And going into 2024, that was not even an idea I had in my brain. And so we had a lot going on with growing the business and trying to get into a commercial property and some other businesses that we're looking to start. And I didn't think that I had the margin or the time for it. And so we went on a fast with our church, and it was the second day of the fast. It was like God opened my brain and dropped this idea into it and then shut it. And it was, you're going to run for mayor. And I was like immediately repulsed, like, ugh, gross. Like, no. Because I knew what that meant. That meant my time was going to be focused on something totally different than what I wanted to pursue.
Right.
And also financially, like campaigns cost a lot of money. And I was like, I am completely fine with being the guy who writes a check to reformers like Nate Schatzline and even Steve Panate when he ran for mayor and all these other really great Christian inspirational leaders. And so I dismissed the idea entirely. And then it was 3 days later, I had the same idea. I was like, what the heck is going on? Like, this has to be God. Honestly, I don't even know when the election is.
Right.
And so
at the time, you didn't even know.
I was like, I don't even, because in my city, our current mayor had been in office for 19 years at this point.
Wow.
And many of those years he was unopposed. And so they wouldn't even have an election for him because there's nobody else to elect.
No one wanted to go.
So it would just roll over from one term to the next. And so I really had no idea. And so I looked it up. I was like, oh, it's in May. I was like, well, maybe I can still get out of this McQuinda. Maybe the time to put my name on the ballot has already passed.
Yeah.
And I looked and I was like, nope, the time to put my name on the ballot is just now opening up.
Dang.
So that was this time where I was like, I think I heard God. Now I need to confirm this. So I asked, God, if this is you, I need you to change my heart and confirm it. And he did. And that was even the scariest part was like, okay, I guess I have to do this. Like,
it's always one thing you ask for a sign that you get the sign like, I don't know if I like that.
Give me another sign.
I need another sign. Yeah.
And so I ended up saying yes to it. And it's one of those things that everyone wonders why we don't have really great, stellar candidates at the federal level for president. is because they get their heads bashed in at the local level. And I'll tell you,
Mm.
going through this campaign, it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. It was one of those things where you put your reputation out there and people don't like what you stand for, and they will do everything in their power to stop you. And so, and this is ironic because like we live in a really small town, and we're right in the middle of the metroplex. So
Right.
we're right next to Dallas and Fort Worth, but we're smack dab in the middle. And I pray is like, God, what am I up against? And this is one thing I'd recommend anyone to do, even we pray all the time for our own business, for God to bless our own business, but ask God to bless the industry that you're in. Ask God to show you what's over your industry so that you can do business differently in that. And so the two things I asked God to show me, and then He revealed is greed and corruption and intimidation. And so immediately when I went to go tell the incumbent mayor that, hey, I feel called to run against you, immediately he spent 90 minutes trying to intimidate me, say I'm too young, too inexperienced, and he knows lots of important people. And I was like, oh shoot, there's the intimidation.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
God
there
showed
it
me.
is.
And every step of the way, so much so we had businesses who wanted to host a meet and greet because they're like, Sean, we want to hear more about your platform, and we want to let people be able to ask questions. One of the businesses that first said yes to that, they got 12 anonymous calls that said, if you host Sean Turner, we're going to ruin your reputation, ruin your business, and tell everyone you support a Christian bigot. And it's just like, what? There's more intimidation. And so we saw that every step of the way. And it's one of those things that God was opening spiritual eyes. Because I had honestly, and I hate to say, I was disengaged from local politics. I was just kind of living my life, growing my business, my family.
Yeah.
And the reality is local politics can shape and affect your life more than any other political realm out there. And so there's things in our community we knew we needed to change. And so behaviors and values that weren't being stood for. And so we decided to run, and it was hard. I'll say that. But I ended up losing, but it was only by a couple hundred votes. And so
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you gave him a run for your money. For his money. Yeah.
And so one thing I didn't realize about campaigning that makes a big impact is knocking on doors. And now I'm prepared to go sell encyclopedias or
anything, trash
cutlery.
bags. Yeah.
Because I've knocked on so many doors.
Wow.
And I got a really good farmer's tan. But it was in those one-on-one conversations I would start telling people, hey, this is who I am, this is what I believe. And I started activating people to see things from a different perspective. And it was phenomenal. But I won't say that it's off the table for the future, but I feel like God's preparing Sean Turner for something bigger, something different.
Wow. Well, it's funny enough. That's going to be my last question of what you believe is next. But I do want to commend you for that because, and listen, I'm not like the biggest political guy. Same way I'm focused on what God's called me to do, right? And in so many ways, I like being a person, not necessarily in the middle as far as not being able to stand, but, I engage with a lot of different people. And sometimes politics can be the thing that kind of cuts off. It's like, oh, if we're not on the same page of this, we're done talking, But I will say I am a firm believer that as Christians, it doesn't make much sense for us to complain about policies if we're not, if none of us are there. And whether that's in politics or even in corporations, like if we're getting mad at big corporations, like, man, they're pushing agendas or they're doing things that are unbiblical. It's like, well, yeah, because there's no believers there that are taking their place. Like,
well, and I didn't know. So one of my neighbors is Jehovah's Witness, and I asked him, I was like, hey, will you guys put a sign in your yard, Sean Turner for the city? And she's like, no, we can't. And I was like, why? And she sent me some Jehovah's Witness article.
Yeah.
And it's basically saying we can't vote, we can't pick sides for anything political, which is totally against the biblical mandate. Biblical mandate in Genesis 1:28 said, fill the earth, multiply, and govern it.
Yeah, subdue it.
And so governing means that you have to be engaged with the political realm. And even when you look at Joseph, for example, in the Bible, he was not a political person until he got thrust into that. And so he was one that was very well, had a business administration gift, and then was a good steward. And then God brought favor on that. And then all of a sudden he was second in command.
Wow.
And so I think being engaged in the political realm, there might be someone listening or watching now that feels that in their heart, that they need to agree to this. And maybe it's not that they run, but maybe it's that they get behind another candidate to kind of see behind the scenes to gain experience ahead of time.
Yeah. I think and I think and again, it's not our job here to tell you how to vote or this or that, but I do think at the end of the day, like you said, I think what we have to get as a revelation in the church is that, whatever the church avoid, the enemy invades. And I think we've abandoned our post in a lot of different sectors of society. And I think part of it is politics.
Yeah.
And I think I heard someone say once, I think that the church can get too political. And obviously we have seen that. But I think it's sometimes like politics has gotten in the church too much as well. And I think it's like, well, there are issues of like, no, like the Bible actually has something to say about that. And we actually can't keep quiet about it.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, oh, just live yes, there is, Paul talks about living a quiet life. But there is also a mandate, like you said, to govern and to make it on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where the perspective is that we have a right and we have a left. Another perspective is that we have God's kingdom, and then you get further and further and further and further away from it. And so that a lot of times we say we don't want any more government, but the reality is like God is in the Bible. It says God's government expands without limit.
Yeah.
And so it's not that we don't need more government or less government. It's that we need more of God's government.
Yes.
And so the way that if we're not ruling in a biblical manner in the way that God would, then it's just being done wrong.
Yeah. I mean, Isaiah 9, it says, well, the government will be upon his shoulders.
Yeah.
Like that's what's prophesied of Jesus. And so I love your courage. I love, if I can tie this bow up, what I have admired from you from afar is just your courage and your ability to just, like you said, to say yes, to be spirit led and be like, even if you like, even hearing the story of like, we didn't even have that much money in the bank account, but we felt this conviction in our hearts and we're going for it to take care of these mothers who want to have children. Or I didn't know anything about the political system, but I felt this in my heart and I'm running and I gave the current mayor a run for his money. Like all these different things. I just admire your courage. If you could encourage those who are younger entrepreneurs in one thing and developing that courage, that ability to say yes, because I do think, not only do this thing, I know because it happened to me. Fear can just bind you, right? Mm-hmm. That's why the Bible says we've not been given the spirit of fear, but power, love, and a sound mind.
Yeah.
But
1 Timothy 2:17.
Yeah. What would you encourage younger entrepreneurs that are in their faith and they're wanting to do big things for the Lord, to take those risks, but they're held back by the fear of what if? What would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if you want to make a big impact in the kingdom, you have to do the small things. And it's those accumulated small decisions that then make the big impact. Everyone is waiting for that big opportunity, but it's saying yes to those small opportunities first that then lead to the bigger ones. And then those accumulate over time make a huge impact. And so I think taking more risks is important. It's like critical that you take more risks. And I'm not talking about going and asking for that girl's phone number, but like that may actually be part of it.
Which is a risk for some men. Some men need to do. Yes. Yeah.
But it's taking those risks and changing the way you think. And so it just goes back to what I said earlier was if you let God transform your mind and change the way you think, he will teach you what his will is for you.
Yes.
Which is good, perfect, and pleasing.
Yes. That's so good. That's so good. Man, I'm encouraged. I really am. I'm like, man, all right, let's go. Let's take some, listen, I'm in the middle of taking risks, so this is actually encouraging to me. So thank you, brother.
Thank you
for being on, man.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching this week's episode of the Faith Hustle Podcast. We hope it encouraged you, equipped you, and got you ready for your faith hustle. If this is something that resonates with you and you want to join this community, we encourage you to subscribe to the podcast, whether it be on YouTube or on any audio platform that you listen to. Also, subscribe to our email newsletter. We put out tips every week to help your business. And lastly, if this podcast has been any encouragement to you, we want to ask if you can leave a review for us. It really helps us to get to more people so more business owners can be impacted by the community and the message. We hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time.